Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for this special webinar called Effective Negotiating, Strategies for Success with Banks, Creditors, and Others. I'm Laurie Ross from Smith School of Business at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Smith is proud to be partnering with the City of Kingston and Kingston Economic Development to bring you this community classroom, a series of weekly webinars by Smith faculty to help local businesses and not-for-profits cope with the impact of COVID-19. Before I introduce today's speakers, a couple of quick things. First, today's discussion will be recorded. We'll post a link to that recording on the website where you registered for today's webinar. Second, you will be able to pose questions to our speaker at any time. To do that, please use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. Shai will be answering your questions at the end. Third and final point, we have two polling questions now to find out who has joined today's community classroom webinar. We're going to open the first poll. You should see a question pop up on your screen. So thinking of the primary business or organization you represent, how would you classify it? Please select one of these choices and you can scroll down. If you use the bar on the right side of the question box, there are a total of 10 options, and then hit submit at the bottom. And we'll give you a few moments to make your selection. Okay, take another few seconds and make sure you hit submit. Okay, we're going to end that poll and we'll take a look at the results. So we have a mixture of not-for-profits, some retail and public administration professionals. Okay, good mix joining us today. The second question should pop up on your screen now. So thinking of the primary organization you represent, and based on your current view of what may come over the next 4 to 6 months, how would you assess the prospects for your organization? Please select one of these and then hit submit. Okay, let's close that poll and take a look at the results. Okay, looks like we have quite a positive group of folks on the line today and a few who are experiencing different things. So I think you'll find our speaker today will have advice for whatever scenario you are in. So it's now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Shai Dubey. Shai is an adjunct assistant professor and distinguished faculty fellow of business law at Smith School of Business. Shai teaches negotiation, cross-cultural management, ethics, domestic and international business law, and entrepreneurship at Smith. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto and a law degree from Queen's. He practiced law with 2 major law firms in Toronto, specializing in corporate commercial law with an emphasis on mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, and aviation. Shai is also a graduate in aviation flight technology and founded an executive aircraft charter company and flight training school. Shai has been heavily involved in the not-for-profit sector, serving on and advising boards in Toronto and Kingston, including helping to establish the University Adjunct Hospital Foundation here in Kingston. He currently chairs the Investment Review Committee for the Southern Ontario Fund for Investment in Innovation. And Shai was inducted into the Kingston Business Hall of Fame in the Mentor category in 2013. Shai, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Laurie, and welcome everybody. Just take 1 second as I'm going to bring my slides up. And here we go. So I know the title was about dealing with creditors and customers, etc., but I want to go a little bit broader, given the extent of the situation that we're all facing, because we are actually negotiating on a daily basis. And those of us that are working from home and have families, there's also the negotiation that's going on with our families, our spouses, our children, our parents, our neighbors, as well as at the workplace. And we're doing it in all kinds of different ways with different stresses that are being imposed upon us. And so what I wanted to do was, this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's a quote that's used a lot at Smith as well. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And when I saw the poll results, when people said they're going to pivot to find a different way, that's really about changing the way you look at the world and the way that things are going to go. So what I'd like to do is to spend a little bit of time just talking about negotiation, about how it's done, maybe why the way we do it isn't the right way to do it, and what it causes, the problems it causes. So let me start with the classical view of negotiation. This is really about two people coming together. We say it's organizations negotiating, but really it's two people coming together. And it's about an argument over dollars, and it's about who pays the least or who gets the most money. And we use the dollars and money as sort of our placeholder as to who's been successful and who hasn't been successful. But if you think about the world, there's more than money involved. Yes, I know there are businesses, and yes, there's a financial crunch that's going on, and I'm not going to say that that's not important. But there's a lot more that goes on in a negotiation and things that are important. And what typically happens when we go into these negotiations is this is how we seem to measure how we did. We look to how the other party did or what we didn't have to give up. And that's how we judge whether we've been successful. We finish this negotiation, we go home, we talk to family, we talk to the people at work and say, I didn't get taken, or yeah, I got a better deal than they got. And it's all around measuring with how many dollars and cents were in play. And the other thing is, in my teaching and research that I do, I constantly hear that everybody has to give something up. We're equally unhappy about the outcome, but we can both live with it because we gave something up. So this is kind of the classical view of negotiation. It's called distributive or positional negotiation. It usually starts with words such as, this is my position. And then people put stakes in the ground, and then there's these concessions that start to happen that move back and forth. And the folks that have the most power, or maybe the most persuasive, end up getting the bigger piece of that pie. And there's a couple of things a couple of fallacies around negotiation. And one is the pie is fixed, that there is really only a finite amount of whatever it is. Yeah, dollars there probably is, but value there probably is not. One of the problems with classical styles of negotiation is it damages relationships. And you've probably all been there, coming out of a negotiation, feeling like you gotten beaten up, and in the back of your mind thinking, either I don't want to do business with them, or I'm going to get even with them. And this is what ends up happening. And we live in a small community where relationships are actually very important. And there aren't that many we can break to begin with. But we also have businesses that reach across and outside the city too, that are doing business globally, that are doing business across Canada. And even those relationships are important. And given the current situation, fragile relationships can be broken very quickly. And as you seek to find different ways to move your business and pivot, so are other people too. And they're looking for opportunities. And so relationships actually are extremely important from the perspective of how are we going to make sure that we can keep the customers, we can keep the creditors, we can keep whomever in play. So if we take a look at negotiation from a different perspective, and what I mean by that is I bet that everybody that's on this call is a great problem solver. In fact, you wouldn't be in business, you wouldn't be doing, because I was looking at some of the names, so I recognize some of you, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing unless you like to solve problems. And so looking at negotiation rather than how do I beat the other person up is how do I work with the other person? How do I solve a problem that I'm dealing with? How do I find solutions that work for both of us? So interestingly, the first type of negotiation, the distributive style of negotiation, here's a couple of things. Theoretically, it should only be applied when there are three conditions in play. First, that it's just about money. Second, relationships don't matter. Third, your interests don't overlap. So you could go on your own after the deal is done. So if you think about what you do, I'll bet you that there are very few situations where all three of those conditions are in play for you to go down the distributive positional type of bargaining. And yet 95% of people go down that path because from the time they were little kids, they were told, hold your cards close. People will take advantage of you. Don't share information. We watch Hollywood, we watch movies, we read books, and in all of those, and even in our ads, in all of those are the classical mistakes around negotiation, that it's about beating the other side up. What if we looked at this from a very different perspective? What if we took a look at negotiation and said, we can create resources? So what do I mean by that? There's a way of looking at negotiation that's used, and I do this, it's called a post-settlement settlement. And what happens in a post-settlement settlement is after a deal is done and people have had a chance to cool down from the friction, the conflict that has occurred, they come back to the table and say, let's start from where we left off and let's see if there's more value for each party. What's interesting is whenever post-settlement settlements have been done and they've been tabulated and value has been looked at, the amount of value that has been created is anywhere from 25 to 75%. So if you think about it, distributive negotiation is destroying up to 75% of value. We leave that behind on the table. It may not be just money, but it's value that you can get for yourself and the other party can get as well. So the research and the experience shows that we're really not as good at negotiation when we go distributive as we think we are. And so instead of waiting to do the post-settlement settlement, we'll talk about how we go into integrated negotiation, but there are resources that are in play. They can be a teammate. I do an exercise when I'm teaching negotiation where I ask people to do an arm wrestle. And I get people going, oh my God, were you really serious about this? I absolutely am. And the purpose of the negotiation or the objective is to get as many points for yourself as you can. You have 20 seconds, nobody can speak, eyes have to be closed. And interestingly, at the beginning of my negotiation courses, I ask people, what does negotiation mean for you? And I get the win-win, we got to work together. But as soon as they go into that negotiation, what they do is they try to put the other person's arm down because they feel that it's a battle. And somebody always in the class figures out that there's a better way to do this. And what they do is they put their own arm down and give a point to the other side. The other side suddenly says, well, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to happen. We're supposed to be in a fight. And suddenly they realize, I need to work together. And arms go back and forth because nowhere does it say in my instructions that the other side can't get points. So the other side, being a teammate, can help with getting what you need, as long as you're not counting what you're giving to them. So long as you get your needs met and they get their needs met, you're solving a problem. These negotiations that you're entering into now, whether they be with your family, with your banks, with your customers, with your suppliers, they all have a future impact. More so now than ever before are they going to have future impact. How you helped create those relationships, how you negotiate, will determine how you're going to stay together in the future as partners as you're moving forward. Changing the game. So here's the interesting thing. In classes that I teach, including executive MBA programs, I'll have 160 people in the class, and maybe 10% of the class will have ever done a negotiation, formal negotiation training. And yet it's a key component of what we do, be it for not-for-profit, be it for the for-profit game, whatever it happens to be. It is a key management skill, and it's also key for our success. And so somebody has to say, I'm going to do this differently. And why not be you, whether it be with your family or with any of these other parties, is we're going to try something different. I'm going to talk as we go on about how to prepare, how to get ready for these negotiations, how to change the game. understanding that if the other side has never had the experience or the training to see the world from a different place, they see the world as a distributive win-lose situation. So you're going to have to sit back a little bit and help them help themselves, and that way they will help you. And the last piece I want you to think about is the communication. At the beginning, I talked about there's this misconception that if we disclose any information, the other side is going to take advantage of us. So what we do, we keep all of this information close to the vest. We try to pry it out of the other side, or they try to pry it out of us, and we're not going to let anything go, because if we do, then they're going to steamroll over top of us. And yet information is what allows creativity. It allows us to understand what people really need. It lets us come up with different ways to solve the problem. You know, you're going to be talking, if you're on the call next week with Sherry, she's going to be talking about pivoting. How do you pivot? I know Ken talked about looking at different ways. These are all ideas, and it shouldn't matter where the idea comes from, but without understanding where all the parties are coming from, and we can say that within a family. You know, I have 2 kids and my wife, and there are times people make statements and we make assumptions and we don't ask the questions, and we use our biases to go down a certain path, and all of a sudden we have a stressful situation that starts to get created. So let's shift into how do we actually take all of this stuff we've talked about and move forward. The first thing I would say, and probably the most important thing in negotiation, and anybody that teaches, does research in this area, or does negotiation will tell you, it's preparation. And interestingly, the vast majority of people don't prepare when they go into negotiation. And there's lots of reasons for that. Many people feel that negotiation is an art form, and they're just going to deal with whatever comes up as it comes up. They can just handle it. But if you have a complex negotiation and there's moving pieces all the time, it's really difficult to deal with that on the fly. And so if you're not prepared, what will happen is, unfortunately, the other side will get an advantage and can take advantage of you at that period of time. So what is involved in preparation? Well, Peter talked about cash flow and how you're going to save cash flow going forward. Ken was talking about, taking a look at different ways, pivoting, how you do business. You understand your business. The thing to realize is the other side does not. You live your business, you live your entity. The other side, or whoever you're going to be talking to, so let me stop using the other side, the people you're going to be partnering with have their own lives. They have their own businesses. They have their own viewpoints. And there's an assumption we make that they get where we're coming from. I would say that they probably don't, because they're dealing with their own issues, they're dealing with their own problems. And so as part of the preparation is, what do you want? But you also need to look at what the other side is dealing with as well. And in preparing, you may not have those answers. And so what that does is it gets you ready to ask the questions that you need to ask to fill the gaps, because not knowing is also powerful, because you can ask all of those right questions. So when you prepare, what is it you really need? That's one of the important things to figure out. What do you think they need? Where are you willing to go? How far can you go? What are you willing to give up? What do you think they're willing to give up? What pressures are they facing as you move forward? How are you going to start this negotiation? And I know it sounds trite, but you're going to come into a room and you're going to sit down and look at each other, and you've got to decide who's going to speak. What do you want to talk about? And here's a piece of advice if you're talking about something dealing with money. Don't start with money. Start with all kinds of other things. Start talking about building rapport. Start talking about things that aren't related to money, because as soon as people get to money, what happens in a negotiation is they become positional, and then every single issue starts to become positional. And I'll come back to how to run the negotiation in a couple of seconds. Here's probably the most important piece of the preparation. prepare options. So if you want something from the other side, let's say it's the bank, and if you go in to talk to the bank and you say to the bank, can you give me a rate break? And they say no, boom, your negotiation is done and you walk out the room. But if you have prepared by thinking about potentially 2, 3, 4 different things that would work for you that you'd be comfortable with, and you go in to talk to the banker is waiting for you to say, give me some sort of a break. And so their back is already up because that's how they prepared. And that request lands on their desk and their automatic response is nope. And again, from their perspective, it's over. But if you say, okay, I get why you might not be able to do that. How about we explore this? Oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. How about we explore this? That's an interesting one. And you've now started that conversation going that was never there before because it was an all or nothing one shot going in. So think about the work that you've done. Think about what your future is going to look like. Think about what you need to be able to get to that place that you need to go to. Now, let's put the shoe on the other foot for a second. Let's talk about bankers. They've got a set of rules behind them. They've got a credit department behind them, but they do live in this community as well. So they are also feeling the pressure. You can read the press about mortgage payments and deferrals, and et cetera, et cetera. They're feeling the pressure as it moves forward. They want you to, as a client, in good times, if a business is in trouble, maybe that's a different situation. Right now, everybody is in trouble. And so think about where the banks are going to be if all their customers disappear. So it also behooves them to try to find creative solutions. But their playbook oftentimes is fairly limited, again, because they know banking. They do not know your business. They don't know what you're doing. So you need to tell them. You need to explain to them. You need to explain how what you're requesting is going to help you to help them so that they can meet their numbers, that they can make sure that they keep their job. And if you help them, they're going to help you back again. But providing options keeps a dialogue going. And it keeps it going there. And once the conversation starts with these different options, be surprised how quickly the creativity starts to flow between people as you move forward. Now, I'm going to go talk to the bank. They've got all the cards. And I'm going to tell you that the banker that's sitting there, having acted for banks through a lot of my career, when the bankers meet with the clients, they're scared to meet with you. And it's interesting in a negotiation, it's like a conflict. Everybody's afraid of the other side. Why? Because we don't know what the other side has from an information flow. There's what's called an asymmetry of information. And all of a sudden, boom, they're going to drop something on the table you weren't expecting, and then you're going to be in trouble. And so this notion that just because somebody is bigger means they have more power is not necessarily true. As we just finished saying about the banks have numbers to meet, they've got to look to the future of what their client base is going to look like. When we go into a negotiation, typically our view about the other side is, oh my God, if I don't get a deal, what am I going to do? So here's something that I would tell you to think about. Think about, what are they going to do without you? And you might say, well, I'm just a small person and I disappear, they're going to have other clients. Really, at this time, this is a problem that's being faced by everybody. Help them to be successful, and they're going to help you at this time. So don't start with the premise that they have more power, because it's not necessarily true. Think through what they're facing. Again, you know your business, you don't know their business. And if you're not 100% sure, remember about how you start the negotiation. This is where you can be asking those questions to understand what's going on. What's going on in their lives? What pressure are they feeling? What's head office putting on them? What are they seeing in the community? These are all interesting starting points that give you information and change the dynamics of that arm wrestle to suddenly you are equals sitting at that table. So don't be afraid because you think the other side has more power. You don't know what's in their back pocket and what they're facing. And in fact, it's an opportunity to be able to help them, because oftentimes out of fear, people take a hardline stance. So if somebody's not acting the way you have in the past dealt with them, and it seems to be a little rough, maybe there's something else going on that's going to give you an opening to open the dialogue and be the first person that actually cares about them, because that's what building relationships really are about. So, you know, when we look at the world, we look at this picture, but what happens when we are trying to get information out of people or to persuade people is we need to understand that everybody looks at the world from a very different lens. We have developed coping mechanisms. We have developed mechanisms to sort out information so that we don't get overloaded. And things that aren't relevant to us, boom, they get pushed to the side so that we see the world from whatever that frame looks like. And each of our frames is different. And so as this ad from HSBC, it's an old ad, shows that we can look at the same object and see it differently. We can look at the same problem and see the problem differently with different solutions. And so to understand where somebody is coming from is really important to how you will present the information that you need to present. And listen to how they present information, because some of us get right to the point and are blunt and upfront and then have explanations afterwards. Some of us give long explanations and then come to the conclusion. And so listening to the individual, listening to what they have to say, not interrupting, is really important to understand where they're coming from. Because once you understand what's important, then you can turn your message and make sure that they're receiving it. We can't influence people. This notion that we keep talking, and by talking, we're going to get them to see our point of view, doesn't work. Because if we don't give them the message that they want to hear, they're never going to be convinced. They've got to hear the message in the way that they see it and structured in a way that makes sense to them. So it's about how you put the message, not how much message that you put on. And effective negotiators, believe it or not, talk only 1/3 of the time. They listen for 2/3 of the time, because what they're really trying to do is to understand the other side so that they can have the other side help you get what you need. And it's extremely important that you think about it from that perspective. So the listening part of what is going on in a negotiation is highly valuable. And the plan that you put into place ahead of time, how am I going to start? What are the things that are important? If all of a sudden you start hearing from the other side certain things that you thought were important to them are not important, maybe you want to drop those and focus on what's important to them and how your plan is going to help them to meet their own objectives. Listening is a very difficult thing to do. And I'm going to talk about a couple strategies, but I also want to talk about a study that's been done about what makes an effective negotiator. So I said one of the things, 2/3 of the time, people are listening rather than talking. The effective negotiators ask a lot of questions. What that means is, there's this view, if I ask a question, I'm going to come across as being dumb. In fact, asking questions does exactly the opposite. If you don't understand something, if you ask people, help me understand, or I'm not sure what that means, it puts the other side more at ease, because what they can do at that time is they can then explain, and it puts them in a perceived power position, and they tell you the information that you need to move forward. Stay away from, and this, again, this happens in stressful situations. And let me give an example, and probably has happened to all of us at certain points in our personal lives, where your partner says, you did this, that really made me upset. And we go, oh yeah, well, 6 months ago you did this and made me upset. And what happens is we go into a downward spiral of accusations and about what's happened in the past. And so experienced negotiators, when people get upset, don't take it personally, don't get caught in that. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you try not to go down that downward spiral, because then it just destroys the relationship. turn it around to ask some more questions. Be careful about the word but. If you're talking to people and they have a good idea, don't turn that around and say, yeah, it's a great idea, but, because a but is a negator. And what it does is it says everything before the but, forget it. Let me tell you how it should be. It's a great idea. And again, this is about building on the idea that's put forward. So if it's a banker, it's somebody who is a donor, for example, build on some thoughts that they have with the and as you go forward. If you are dealing with customers and you are dealing with, if you're a banker on this call, you're dealing with your customers or customers in retail or food, be really careful about using language such as this is a fair offer, this is a reasonable offer, because in a negotiation situation, unfortunately, sometimes people take that to mean I'm not fair, I'm not reasonable, right? Or this is the best offer you're going to get. Those are called irritants in a negotiation situation. And again, if you're trying to build your relationship with people, those are not good words to be using. So one of the things I said earlier that is we negotiate around money. And my view about negotiation is the currency of negotiation is information. And information is what gets people through creativity to find solutions to come out the other side. And it's what finds out the interests of the other party. And so if you're a not-for-profit, maybe the donations aren't coming in, but maybe your potential donors or your past donors, because they don't have the money right now, but maybe they have the time to do certain things. So this is, again, the pivot on how you take people to do things in a different way. But how do you find out what the interests are, especially when people don't want to talk? Because that's the key. And I know I'm going to get that question. How do I get people to talk? There is a method called mirroring. And kids use it all the time, and it is highly effective. And how mirroring works is when you're talking to somebody, is you can, so let's say somebody says, yeah, it's a very stressful situation, you know, for the family. And what mirroring is taking the last few words or the last words that are sort of critical and just repeating them with an inflection as a question, family. And what that does is it poses a question. And interestingly, most people, when they get that, will continue to talk to fill that gap in, to give you more information. Or the other thing you can do is you can ask, help me understand. Or what's also fascinating from research is that we end up looking, when we go to buy something, we look at websites with reviews. We tend to go to negative sites. The world, unfortunately, is a glass half empty type of world. So we always can find faults. So if people aren't going to tell you something that you're asking them, what's fascinating is ask them to criticize you. Ask them what's wrong with the proposal that you put forward to them. What's wrong with the plan that you're proposing to move forward to, you know, to work together. And you'll probably get an answer such as something like this. Well, it doesn't do this, it won't accomplish that, it won't do this. And by listening to their answers, you'll understand exactly what's important to them, because in the negative, they've just told you what's important. And now, to be effective, it's up to you to say, oh, I didn't realize that that was a challenge for you. How about if we were to do something like this? And so here you've gotten that information, you've turned it around, not for a negative purpose, but you've turned this around to help them to achieve their goal as they move forward. And just before I'm going to open it up for discussion here in a couple of minutes, I'm also going to tell you one other thing to keep in mind. When we come to negotiation, people think that the problem that the other party brings to the table is their problem. It's not for yours to deal with. They can deal with it. So your client's problem is their problem. The bank thinks that your financial problem is your problem, but it's not. If you're going to work together, the problem somebody brings to the table, be it your client coming to you or you going to somebody else, is both your problems as you start to work together. And so it's really important not to push aside what somebody says is important to them, because if you can help them deal with that issue, what you're going to find is that they will help you in the long run to solve what your issues and problems are as well. And don't try to solve all of the problems at one time. This is one of the mistakes that I see people make. When you start a negotiation, if you have planned properly, what you're going to have is a list of things that you need to get accomplished. Start with the easiest ones, not the hardest ones to deal with. Because when you start with the easiest ones and you can get an agreement, you start to build rapport with each other. So think of each of those as a negotiation. And when you get stuck somewhere, you can always go back and say, hey, look, we got these 4 things already solved. We can do this one as well. So it just builds that momentum. If you start with the hardest one, you're probably going to end up stalling if you can't find a solution through this. So think about from your planning, again, where do you want to start? How do you want to start? If they start talking about money, how can you get them off that by talking about other things that are of interest? You have to come back to money eventually, but let's not start from that perspective. Respect the person on the other side, respect what's of importance to them, and show them that in your negotiation and your questioning. Change the frame, change the way you look at negotiation. Let's think about not about how do we get the best of somebody, but how do we work together? How do we solve a problem? And when you start, instead of saying, let's negotiate, sit down and say, hey, let's see if we can solve this problem that we've got. And it's interesting where that problem mindset comes into play. People suddenly don't have that conflict mindset in play. It's like, oh yeah, I can solve a problem. Let's see if we can move forward. And it doesn't matter who you do this with. But when you prepare the other side's position. Don't just prepare your own, because if you prepare your own, you have perfect perception of one half of the problem, yours, but you don't have perception of theirs. And that, I would say, is, to me, the way that you are going to work together, because we are not going to come through this crisis that we're facing unless we can give each other a helping hand to come out the other side, recognize that we are all going through stress, understand where that stress is, help the other side be creative too to find solutions. And when they give you solutions that you haven't thought about, does it matter to you that it comes from you or it comes from them? Sometimes people can see things from outside that you can't see from inside. And think of problem solving from a brainstorming perspective. Get a free flow of information. Get people to start throwing ideas around. And one of the things I will tell you right now is, in a negotiation, this will be my last point, is that when you put an issue on the table, people think that's your position that you're going to hold to. If you don't want that to happen and you want brainstorming to happen, start with, I don't want any commitments. Suppose we were to do this, how might this look? And let's play this out. And then don't attack them as you go forward. And you may be surprised what comes out the other side from a deal. Sometimes they just come together when you least expect that they're going to come together. And the outcomes can be absolutely fabulous. And for those negotiations that you've already done, think about going back to the other side with a post-settlement settlement. Think about how you can help both sides, what value has been left on the table that you haven't discussed. We don't do this because we're too busy going from deal to deal. But go back and say, hey, do you have time to have a chat? I think we can both do better on this deal. Open it up, build that relationship, because those are the customers that will keep coming back to you, or the donors that will keep coming back to you, or the people you're working with will keep coming back to you because you have found value for them. And in finding value from them, in the long run, you're going to find value for yourself too. And so with that, I'm not going to say questions. This is about discussion more than it is about question, because each one of you on this call has a tremendous amount of experience. And so even putting out some of your own viewpoints and things that have worked for you, for others, as this is going to be posted, I've been talking for about 40 minutes or so it hasn't been very long. Normally when I teach a course, it's about a 12-week course, so we're compressing a lot of stuff. So Laurie, you're going to be... I
am. I'm right here. So right. Yeah, why don't we take down your slide and let's have some questions. Thank you, Shai.
Stop sharing
So,
here. So there you go.
okay, super, thank you. So we're going to open the floor, as Shai said, to Q&A. So if you have a question, please submit one in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. But I'm going to start off, Shai, by calling on your experience. You know so many businesses and organizations in the Kingston region, and we'd like to hear what you have heard are some of the more successful strategies in negotiating in this current climate, and maybe some that aren't so successful, because we can always learn from mistakes.
Sure. I mean, the most successful ones are ones where people go in looking to work together, and they don't go in trying to threaten the other side. You know, when somebody comes in and says, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you don't do this, I'll be out of business. Well, we all recognize that's going to happen. And so it doesn't give the other side a lot of room to maneuver, because it really is a threat. And one of the things to be careful about is, if you're going to make a threat, make sure you're going to exercise on the threat. The other side might force you to exercise. So go in and say, hey, I have a problem. Can we sit down and talk about it? And having that discussion tends to end up in a better place.
And we noticed when everyone signed in that there are a number of companies and organizations here that are pivoting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have so looking for new opportunities, do you have any particular advice to how they can do that successfully by using some of the tools that you talked about today?
Well, you know, it's entrepreneurship is really more about understanding what your client wants and how do you get to your client. And so if your existing clients, for example, are your best clients, is how do you reach out to them to tell them what you're doing and where you're going to be going, so that they can also, you're also your best folks to spread the word. But if they don't know what you're doing, they're not going to be able to help you at that point. So it's always better to talk to them, tell them what's going on, make sure that it resonates with them, because they'll also give you feedback about where you might be pivoting to. So it's not just about making the pivot, but it's making sure that it's the right pivot that you're making and that you're going to get support.
Okay. I think folks are a little reluctant to share their negotiating questions with you right now, so they may be holding their cards to their chest.
There you go.
But we do have a number of not-for-profits, as we saw on this as well. And you spoke a little bit about funders and some of the ways to expand how they might be supporting you in this time when maybe they're a little reluctant or unable to keep supporting you. But maybe you can talk about that a little further.
Sure. Well, financially, you know, a lot of people have taken a financial hit as we're into 7 weeks of this lockdown at this point. But it doesn't mean that they don't want to be involved. They just don't know how to get involved sometimes. So the classical way is always asking for money. But, you know, why do people give? Because they want to be participants. They want to make a difference. So the thing to think about is, what else can an organization do where their past donors or future donors can add some value, as they're struggling with the cash flow issue too. And how do you get these people to do some work for you? Because there's always work that needs to get done, and people have the time. They're sitting at home, and it's also to feel good about moving forward and what you've done for your community too. It's about giving back, and there's a sense of accomplishment. But we don't ask. All we tend to ask, having been on charity boards, is how do we get money? And sometimes how do we get people involved? But this is a time to think about, how do we get people more involved? And what's the interest that we're looking at? I'm bored. I need something to keep myself occupied. These are the interests that we're trying to fulfill for these folks.
Okay, good advice. Excuse me. Thank you. Good advice, Shai. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, I think we know what we've covered, and I think people know how to also get in touch with me if they want. So I'm happy to talk. Sometimes what I find is that talking to somebody else as you go through the planning process, it gives a different insight. I mean, that's one of the things, is that we can't always see what the forest looks like, because the trees are on the way. Oh, we did have a question just pop up here. And so it's always interesting to see how other people perceive the problem and how we might be able to deal with it, right? Because doing the same thing over and over again is not really helpful.
Yeah, good point. So here's a question. How does the current uncertain scenario shape negotiations, given a lack or quickly changing information?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Sorry, you cut
Yeah.
out there.
So yeah, how does the current uncertain scenario that we have here with COVID-19 shape negotiations, given that there's a lack of information or quickly changing information?
Yeah, information, I don't know if it's changing faster than it would in certain areas than it did when we didn't have this. But there's always a lack of information that we're dealing with. It's about dealing with uncertainty. And one of the things that you can do when you're dealing with uncertainty is you can build in what are known as contingencies. Rather than trying to hold people to a deal, say, if the situation stays like this, we can do this. If it changes, then we're going to come back and revisit, and we may have to adjust. So build that into your negotiation, because both sides know that that's going to happen, right? And so it's like arguing for a price of this pen. We can both argue what it's worth or whatever we're trying to sell, but it has value to both sides, and the value might be changing. And you can say, well, if this happens and you need to write lots of reports, and we're going to sell you the pen plus this as a contingency deal. So build those in so that you have, I won't say wiggle room, but you have a way to adjust your deal that's there. And yes, you may have a contract, but you can also build in contingency language if there's a contract in play.
Okay. Here's another one about not-for-profits. So in most cases, not-for-profit is negotiating from a weaker position based on leverage. How do we raise our level to ensure that we begin the conversation on common ground?
Okay, so we come back to the power situation that we talked about. Do they really have more power? And arguably, because you're looking for money, you can say yes, they do. But at the same time, we all live in a community, and the community's health, all the way across from the lower income all the way to the top, is important, because without that health in place, the community falls apart. And so it's about making sure that we as a community are going to survive. It's making sure that that's the information that's going to get out there. It's discussing why this is going to be the issue for the other side. I wouldn't go into fear mongering. This is what's going to happen if it comes apart. I think most of us have figured out what's going to happen. But how do we prevent a breakdown in the community through the fact that the not-for-profits can probably reach the most vulnerable parts of this population. And those vulnerable parts of the population are also the ones that are suffering the most, not just financially, but also from a health perspective. And if we're in lockdown, we come out of lockdown, it can have all kinds of problems. We have to take a look at why we are here as a not-for-profit, what we're doing for the community, and how we can help those people. So are you at a weaker standpoint from raising money? Yeah, I would probably have to concede that that's true. But are you at a weaker standpoint if you look at a much broader picture? I don't think you are, because I don't think any individual in this city can do what a not-for-profit can accomplish. And I think that's a really important message that needs to go out.
Okay. Shai, any pointers or ideas on negotiating with an IT company for providing programming? So business for them may be very slow right now, and for the foreseeable future, months, possibly years.
I see the message in the chat. With an IT, is it you, Karen, that's negotiating with the IT company, or are you the IT company? I guess that's a question which way you're going, because there's two possible different answers that I can provide there.
Why don't we give Karen a second to respond? And there's another question here. Can you offer any suggestions for how to handle a difficult colleague where there's a long history of their negative personality? Someone who, when they don't get the answer they want, tries over and over again to browbeat others into their point of view.
Dealing with difficult negotiators. Yeah. It's a fascinating one to deal with. So if they don't get their answer, they try to browbeat. So that, I think, it's a question of, are you willing to put up with this kind of behavior is the first piece. How do I answer that question? Because that's a common thing that occurs. Um, you know, again, without a little more context around what's going on in the company, is this person so integral to the company? Are you right now? People are less likely to leave their jobs because of what's going on, and more likely to put up with this stuff than when the situation is different. But you know, part of it is probably one is not to react to them. It would be my first suggestion, because one of the things that people try to do to get you mad is there's something called the anger curve. And if I was to draw the anger curve, what you would see is as your anger level goes up, your emotions go up, your cognitive ability goes down. So one of the things that they're really trying to do is to get you mad enough that you're going to say something you're going to regret later. So be careful about that. Second thing you probably want to ask is if they're trying to browbeat because they didn't get the answer, is ask why they need the answer. Have them start to explain it. And I think the more that people start to explain, sometimes, and not everybody, sometimes people walk their way out of that requirement. And it also gives you the ability when they're not getting the answer is maybe there's another answer that is going to satisfy them. Um, and sometimes you just have to say to them, no, I'm not going to give you an answer. And we're not going to do this. Or if it's something that's important, there's what's known as the positive no. And the positive no is if it's an important issue you're dealing with, is to say, no, we're not going to deal with it this way. It's important. First of all, you say it's important. There's the yes. I'm not going to deal with it this way. And I suggest we're going to come out by dealing with it from this perspective. And there's some people in this world, unfortunately, there's no getting through to them. And I'm sorry, I don't know who this individual is, but I think you got to get them talking, but not talking about browbeating, but explaining by asking the mirroring questions, asking the why questions, the how questions, explain, I mean, understand. And so let them talk so you can get enough information and they can also calm down.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to go back to that earlier question, Shai, where Karen was asking, are there any pointers or ideas on negotiating with an IT company for providing programming? And in her case, she is the one looking at purchasing IT programming.
Okay. So you've had a company that's looking, and we have a company, but they're not providing service any longer. And the program is unreliable. So you need something new. So again, don't know, Karen, don't know what the business is, but right now companies are hungry for work, and many businesses aren't actually purchasing IT because of cash flow crunches. So it's interesting that both sides are struggling at this point in time, which actually gives both sides the ability to sit down to think about long term and what it's going to look like. And obviously, you don't want this company to go under, because if you squeeze them too hard, they may not be around. You may have another product. So this is the perfect opportunity to sit down and say, what is it you're doing? How can we work together? Where is the future going to look like? And start laying the cards on the table. I mean, the fact that your IT company's gone out of business is to say, we've had this happen. Where's the guarantee? Or what's the likelihood you're not going to do this? Where are you standing? Let's figure out a way to move forward. Again, this is where we negotiate by holding the cards close to the vest and trying to bluff the other side about stuff and say, I want to move forward. I want to have an open discussion about what's going on, where you are, what your future looks like. How can we make sure that if we're going to be together, we're going to be together for a long period of time? And then, can they meet your requirements? What else is going on? And it might be, again, that you could be the catalyst that helps them to get other work if they can work with you. So there's that symbiotic relationship that can move the parties together. Does that give you a broad answer, Karen, without knowing the specifics?
I'm just reading into what she said, and maybe she'll write some more, but it may be.
Oh, there we go. Thanks.
Sorry. That's a yes. Super. Okay. Well, I think we're about to wrap up here, Shai. So that's all we have for questions. But before we let you all go, we've got 3 final points. First of all, I want to let you know about next week's webinar. I'm just going to share my screen and show you a little more. So we have Sherry Hewson is going to be delivering a webinar on innovating through a crisis, how to pivot to provide new opportunities. And that's next Wednesday. We're back to our regular Wednesday next week at 4 o'clock. And Sherry is the director of the Master Management Innovation and Entrepreneurship program at Smith. She's also a lecturer and experienced and accomplished entrepreneur, a social innovator, and extreme adventurer. Sherry has founded 5 companies, 2 of which are ongoing and involve in the healthcare industry, scaling technology, and data-driven organizations. You'll receive an email later this week with a link to register. I want to remind you as well that through Smith School of Business and the Kingston Region Business Community Network, Support Network, we are offering free consulting services by the business students at Smith School of Business to local organizations. You can register at the website that you see here on your screen, and we'll be sending you a link later this week too. The third and final item is a final poll question, and that's to ask what your top 3 challenges are right now as you're dealing with the pandemic in your organization. You're going to see a question pop up right there, and we'd like you to take a moment to choose up to 3. What are the 3 major challenges for your business right now or organization? And again, you can use the scroll bar on the right side of that question box to see all of them. So take a few minutes. You can continue doing that while we sign off, and hit submit at the end, and that'll give us some great information about future webinars that we can offer to support you, and also take a pulse on what's happening in our region. So in speaking of wrapping up, we are going to first of all thank Shai. Thank you, Shai, for sharing your insights with us today. And to everyone who joined us from Smith School of Business at Queen's, thank you, and hope to see you again soon next week, Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Take care.